Hi, I'm Tim Tyler, and this is a video about cultural evolution and its portrayal in evolution textbooks. So, first of all, here are some evolution textbooks. I'm going to start by describing my own view of the subject. I think that cultural evolution is part of evolution by definition. The definition of evolution just says that it's about heritable traits, the changes in heritable traits in a population over time, and it doesn't say how the inheritance takes place, whether or not it's by nucleic acids or by cultural transmission or by some other means of transmitting information down the generations. So by that definition, circumcision is transmitted down the generations, and so counts as evolutionary change. Wearing kilts, for example, is also transmitted down the generation, and changes in kilt styles would be a class of evolutionary change. And similarly with spoken language, for example, changes in spoken language are also a type of evolutionary change according to the definition of evolution. Now, the textbooks on evolution don't seem to make much mention of cultural change. They describe changes in DNA-based creatures, but they fail to mention changes in televisions or computers or designs of automobiles or designs of musical instruments. There's a whole section of what I regard as the biosphere that's excluded from the evolutionary explanation by conventional descriptions of evolution. So let's see how the theory is portrayed in the textbooks. To start off with, here is Evolutionary Biology by Douglas Fujiyama, one of the well-known textbooks on evolution. This particular book makes no mention of cultural change. There's no coverage of cultural evolution at all. It presents a standard definition of evolution, which includes cultural evolution by definition, but there's no coverage in the book of cultural evolution. So completely ignores the whole subject, doesn't attempt to describe the controversy over the issue, just completely ignores it, a kind of huge blind spot in the book. So that's the first one. Second one has some more interesting coverage. Evolution by Mark Wiggly, another well-known evolutionary textbook. This book differs in its definition of evolution. It presents the standard definition, and then it raises three exceptions that it thinks are irregularities that don't count as evolutionary change. The first is changes in a population which are due to development. So changes over an individual's lifetime don't count as evolution, it says, which seems relatively uncontroversial to me. Changes over an individual's lifespan don't result in any heritable changes in the population, basically. So that's agreed by most parties not to count as evolution. The second one that it mentions is changes in an ecosystem over time. So if species A and species B, say species A is 10% of the population, species B is 90% of the population, and then that changes so that species A is 70% and species B is 30%. It claims that doesn't count as evolution because there's no change within each individual species. And then there's a third exception, and that's cultural evolution. It says cultural evolution doesn't count as evolution, and the explanation reads as follows. Changes that take place in human politics, economics, history, technology, and even scientific theories are sometimes loosely described as evolutionary. In this sense, evolutionary means mainly that there has been change through time, and perhaps not in a preordained direction. Human ideas and institutions can sometimes split during their history, but their history does not have such a clear-cut, branching, tree-like structure as does the history of life. Change and splitting provide two of the main themes in evolutionary theory. So here Mark Wiggly presents his justification for ignoring cultural evolution in the rest of the book, but his justification, based on the supposed lack of branching structure within cultural evolution, is just a kind of a basic fallacy of cultural evolution. If you exclude phenomena that don't have a branching tree-like structure, then that immediately writes off most of the bacterial kind of root of the tree of life, because there's horizontal transmission of heritable information just as there is in cultural evolution. And that point made by Daniel Dennett, for example, in Freedom Evolves, which I'll briefly quote from. It is sometimes claimed, erroneously, that this cultural transmission, being between genetically unrelated individuals, shows that human culture cannot be interpreted as an evolutionary phenomenon governed by the principles of neo-Darwinian theory. In fact, as we have just seen, horizontal transmission of good design elements between unrelated individuals is recognised as an important feature of evolution of early single-celled life, with a growing list of proven instances, a centrepiece, not an embarrassment, of contemporary evolutionary biology. And Daniel precedes that by a discussion of symbiotic relationships and how they indicate transmission of heritable information horizontally between existing organisms rather than down through the generations to generate a branching tree-like structure. So this is just a fallacy. The idea that cultural evolution displays horizontal transmission and biological evolution doesn't is wrong. Biological evolution itself displays horizontal transmission in almost identical manner to cultural evolution. So the whole basis of Mark Ridley's dismissal of cultural evolution just seems wrong to me. Also, the whole idea of setting up a nice, neat definition of evolution and then listing exceptional cases just goes against the grain as kind of from the perspective of the philosophy of biology. You want evolution to be a neat, clearly defined category, not some category, and then a list of exceptional cases that don't count. So his three cases, he excludes change during development, which is fair enough because that's not inherited, that's not part of evolution anyway. But his other cases, change in an ecosystem due to changing distributions of species, that counts as evolution, and cultural change, that counts as evolution too in my book. So anyway, at least he presents a coherent reason for ignoring cultural evolution, even though that reason is wrong, basically. So that's Mark Wiggly. And then lastly, Munro Strickenberger, another evolutionary textbook. Here, this textbook's about 13 years old, but actually gives some coverage of cultural evolution. This textbook radically disagrees with the other textbooks that I cited in that it classes cultural evolution as evolution. And there's a nice, neat paragraph that expresses the sentiment. It says, in short, humans have two unique hereditary systems. One is the genetic system that transfers biological information from biological parent to offspring in the form of genes and chromosomes. The other is the extragenetic system that transfers cultural information from speaker to listener, from writer to reader, from performer to spectator, and forms our cultural heritage. Both systems are informational in that they produce their effects by instruction, the biological system through the information embodied in DNA via the coding properties of these cellular macromolecules, the cultural system through social interactions coded in language and custom and embodied in records and traditions. So, amazingly, a textbook of evolution that actually includes something about cultural evolution. It doesn't include much coverage, it's got that paragraph, and then there's another short paragraph which sounds as though it's going to lead on to something interesting. It says, the fact that human culture has as its source a biological foundation, and that both culture and biology arise from informational systems that evolve over time, has prompted various writers to suggest that general laws cover both society and nature, each sharing similar evolutionary mechanisms, especially that of natural selection. And yes, that's exactly the idea, but unfortunately then it goes on for several pages about social Darwinism and sociobiology and doesn't really address the topic that it originally sounded like it was going to talk about. So although there's some coverage, hardly any. It's all confined to a short chapter at the end entitled Culture and the Control of Human Evolution. Does talk about genetic engineering a bit, but still extremely meagre coverage right at the end of the book, but at least provides an exception to the rule of textbooks completely ignoring cultural evolution, actually includes cultural evolution in evolutionary theory, which is a big breakthrough as far as I'm concerned, as far as conventional academic establishment of evolution goes. So good score there. However, poor coverage, only a few pages really. So that's how I think the textbooks stack up regarding cultural evolution. As far as I can see, all the textbooks need a complete rewrite to deal with the issue. It's not something that's unique to humans. It's embedded in all animal evolution practically. There's evidence that small birds exhibit cultural evolution, and insects as well, and culture and genes co-evolve, so you can't really understand evolution without considering cultural evolution. Yeah, major rewrites seem to be required to me. So that's how I think the textbooks currently stack up. Another assessment in a few years, perhaps. For now, enjoy.